Hi, my wife had a difficult cancer for 3 years and passed away in 2012 when our kids were toddlers. I wanted to share from what we learned and what led her to say it was the hardest but most beautiful experience of her life. So I've made videos in these topic threads behind me, which you can skip around. For more on our story, you can watch the video on our background. This video is in the thread on coping. The purpose of this video is to explain a little bit more about the list of coping strategies that I showed in the Coping and Recovering overview video. I'll define and explain a few more of the strategies, but I won't go through all of them since that would take a while and some can be tougher to explain. I'll do 5 sections in a 2-part video on this topic. First, a brief introduction about diverse coping and then a quick review of the table. Then I'll explain some non-obvious adaptive strategies and stop this Part A video in order to keep it short. In the next Part B video, I'll describe an avoidance strategy, some conversion strategies, and conclude with a few of the attack and self-harm strategies. New research suggests that flexing between many different coping strategies is helpful. I didn't know it back then, but I remember doing what I called riding different trains of thought back around 2010 and after. For example, to get to your unique destination when you ride trains or buses or planes, you often have to connect and transfer to a different vehicle. Or maybe just in your commute, you need to get from point A to point B, but you change it up and take different routes on different days. I remember thinking it felt right to do this back then to avoid getting stuck in a rut. I made a point of going with different trains of thought, like it would be okay, or it would be terrible, or I'd figure it out, or maybe it would ruin things. Sometimes I'd be sad, sometimes confident, sometimes scared, and sometimes energized. I'd spend some time with all these thoughts to keep from avoiding certain thoughts or feelings altogether. Years later, the research seems to say that using a lot of different coping strategies and switching between them seems to help recovery. So I made a table to see the major coping strategies in one place, and this video explains a bit about some of the less obvious strategies in the table. Here's the list of coping strategies that I showed in the other video. Remember that researchers have found that there isn't a magic set of coping strategies to use that leads to good outcomes for everyone. Even though some of them are somewhat negative, like cutting social ties, they can be thought of as being possible parts of a natural process and okay to spend some time at least thinking about or doing, as long as you can move on and change into other strategies at some point. Remember that the strategies are grouped into rough categories by motivation. When dealing with difficult circumstances, we can take a few approaches. We can avoid it, we can adapt to it, we can convert the situation to some other frame of understanding, we can attack and push back, or we can get into self-blame and self-harm to try and manage what's going on. Those are the column headings. I'm going to start the first section explanation with a couple of adaptive strategies and more details about them. Conscious reappraisal and challenge orientation. Conscious reappraisal is a surprisingly powerful tool. It requires a little writing into a worksheet, but can really help change and manage emotions within minutes. Many doctors and researchers believe that our emotions are tremendously impacted by the thoughts running in our mind at the time. Like, if a spouse is late getting home from work, those are the facts. They aren't home. But if a person at home thinks the spouse is in a car accident, or is having an affair, or is just caught up in a normal meeting, then each of those thoughts will create very different emotions in the person waiting at home. Conscious reappraisal exercises ask you to write down the emotion you're feeling and the intensity on a scale of 1 to 100. Then you write down the thought running in your head that is happening along with the emotion. There are 10 types of distortions in our thinking, and you identify which one is being used, or that multiple distortions are being used in your thoughts in your head right then. Then you reappraise the situation and write down a different explanation for what is happening and why your first thought might be distorted. Personally, I've found that the process of writing out a different explanation, one which is reasonable and believable, helps to reduce the intensity of the emotion, usually by about half. And even years later, if I'm starting to have that same thought and emotion, I can just go back and read the explanation and it works again. It's like having a calm and wise advisor who really speaks your language. I wanted to show you the different types of distortions in thinking that can lead to emotions getting overheated, but there's a lot of text on this screen and I'm not going to read through it. I'll just leave it for you to pause the video if you want and read it, or you can search for cognitive distortions online and read more there. I don't mean to say that these can cure all of the emotions that go along with traumatic news. That's not true. Nor is it true that if you're feeling strong emotions, then it's always because you're jumping to conclusions. Some news just creates strong emotions. But in your toolbox of coping, this reappraisal can be a helpful tool to flex into at some points. The other adaptive strategy I want to touch on before moving to the next section is challenge orientation. This is something that researchers noticed was present in some people's toolbox when responding to traumatic news. Some of them talked about the stress as a challenge and something that they could see eventually leading them to be stronger and more capable in the future. This perspective wasn't always there from the beginning, but even if people built up that idea over time, it seemed a valuable tool. It's a way to acknowledge that there's difficulty now, but to try to see it differently than something purely negative and something which will drag down everything about your life. Or even if it is going to drag down your life, maybe there's just some satisfaction in handling the challenge for an hour or two at a time. And this seems to hold up. In fact, there was a study of prisoners of war where the majority said they would not go back and change their lives to avoid becoming a POW if they could. They came to view their experience as providing perspective, empathy, growth, and strength that they sometimes valued having in their life. I'm going to end part A of this video here so that it doesn't get too long. Part B is another 5 minutes or so, and I'll pick up with some details on avoidance strategies there. See you in another video.